Hi guys, welcome back. So we're continuing our discussion about the origins and use and spread of the thumb release. You know, the four-finger thumb release. Now the first thing I'm going to say again, these videos I'm making on this subject are my own interpretation of history. I don't claim to be the be-all and end-all when it comes to researching these sort of subjects. I've got issues and things like that, so I do what I can. But what I'm saying makes sense to me. Now, if you're no different, or if you think you're no different, please, by all means, comment and we'll have a conversation. However, that said, you will have to go some in order to convince me that I'm wrong. That said, let's get on with it. Now, we've established that the Chinese created the thumb release in order to alleviate a problem they had in terms of the power of their bows as a result of their lack of physical stature. That's the first point. Now, the second point I'm going to make is we can only go off the evidence that is available. We can make assumptions, we can extrapolate, but at the end of the day, the only way to know for sure is if we have documentary or depicted evidence, visual evidence on the subject. So quite a lot of what I'm going to say in this video is just extrapolation and conjecture, but it still makes sense. However, there are actually points within this video which are based on documentary evidence. Now, there seems to be a general consensus when you look at people talking about the thumb release style of archery. There seems to be a consensus that that goes hand in glove with horse archery, that one was developed in conjunction, hand in hand with the other. That if you didn't have thumb release, you wouldn't have horse archery. If you didn't have horse archery, you wouldn't have thumb release. I'm sorry to disappoint some people, but that's rubbish. The thumb release was developed during the Shang dynasty by the Chinese. And the date put on it is nearly 2,000 plus years BCE, before Christ, before the Christian era. So we're looking at a total of 4,500 years ago they developed. But if you look at the documentary evidence available within the Chinese record, of which it is substantial, they were very good, very efficient record keepers, and a lot of those records still exist today. The first ever mention of mounted or horse archery, whatever you want to call it, doesn't arise within the Chinese record until 307 BCE, almost 1700 years after the creation and development of the thumb release. The Chinese have been using the thumb release as the standard for their archery for 1700 years before they even think about using horseback mounted archers. And this is, we know this, it's written into the record. You have to do some digging, but it's there. Now, the records talking about horse archers come at the end of the Zhou dynasty, 307 BCE. And the documents are talking about the development of a cadre of military with using horse archery, using mounted archers, basically putting archers onto horseback. Up until that point, the Chinese mounted archers, mobile archers, had been working from the backs of chariots. And the chariots, they had very many chariots, but the main military chariot, which lasted for over 1,000 years, was the two-horse, three-man chariot. Two horses with a driver, a spearman to protect the chariot, and an archer. and the chariots were big enough for the spearman and the archer to move around relatively steadily on the moving platform. Now this is where the thumb release comes in, because it actually adds a little bit of versatility in terms of moving while shooting, a little better than a vertical hand release does. If you're using a thumb release, you can cope with body twisting, body movement, shortening and lengthening of draw lengths through your own personal movement than you can with a vertical hand release. So that's another thing in that favour. But the horse archers. Now, if you look at the record, the horse archers, once they come into regular use within the Chinese tradition, they're almost contemporary with the instigation of what we know today as the Silk Road trade routes. Now, the Silk Road officially starts at about 260 BCE. Mounted archers start at 307 BCE. Now, the records suggest that the original intent for the mounted archers is to patrol the borderlands between what's now Mongolia and China, because there were, at the time, regular raids by the nomadic tribespeople from Asia and the steppe and Siberia raiding into China. So that's why we have the creation of finally have mounted archers within the Chinese military tradition from 307, and they go into sort of regular recorded duties around about 260, 270, along with the creation of the Silk Road. Part of their duties, and again, there are records for this, was to escort high-value trade caravans moving onto and along the Silk Road, because they were transporting valuable trade goods, spices, silks, alcohol, lots and lots of different things were starting to move along the Silk Road at this time. Now, the Silk Road wasn't just a single road going from east to west. The trade routes went north and south. They went down into Indochina, into the Indian subcontinent, trading with the Indus Valley civilizations. They went down into Asia Minor, and eventually when they get to the Mediterranean and the trading with the Greeks and the Romans, and there was a lot of trading going on. Now, the Silk Road started in 260, continued all the way through until the 15th century, 1500s, AD. So it was a very extensive trade route, and it needed guards for, and that's where we see the first instance of Chinese horse archery using the thumb release. Now, I've already said that we can only go on the evidence that we've got. Now, the next bit is a little bit of supposition on my part. During the Shang dynasty, there were, under the leadership, I think it was Sheng He, under his leadership, he wanted to expand westward and increase the sphere of influence of the Chinese people. And he sent out missions, both military and trade, in around about from around about 1200 BCE. He sent people all over the place. Now, if we're looking at the northwestern Chinese expeditions, the first people they come into contact with in about 1300, 1200 BCE are the Saka peoples. Now, unfortunately, there's very little known about these people, other than the fact that they were a mixture of ethnic Chinese and Northern European. They were semi-nomadic, and we know this because the Shang recorded their dealings with them. As I said, they were semi-nomadic, but they were what they would be described as pastoral horse people, as in they herded and managed and lived their lives on and around horses. a long time before the Mongolians come along. The Mongolians are the ones that everybody knows about, but a similar sort of culture, but less warlike. And we know that they traded with the Chinese because the Chinese recorded the instances. But the Sheng also mixed with them as well, and had families and actually became part of the Saka tradition. Unfortunately, we don't know anything other than the fact that they were horse people. We don't know anything about their archery tradition. We do know they hunted. They were semi-nomadic, and they followed the herds as they travelled east and west and north and south. So they were not quite hunter-gatherers, but they were close too. So we can't really say anything about that. Now, the one thing I will say though, and this applies even to today with modern military and modern sports and everything.
Charging 2044.
Shut up.
Charging started, battery level 98%.
Shut up.
Wi-Fi security.
I hate this
Scanning
bloody
screen
thing.
off.
Now, if you have an archery tradition based around your own development of technique and equipment, you are not going to adopt a technique from another group of people that you come across unless it is substantially better than what you have already. So, as far as the Saka are concerned, they already had an archery tradition. But would it benefit from adopting the techniques of the Chinese? We don't know. Possibly. It is possible that the Saka adopted the thumb release. They might have decided that it was better than their equipment, their techniques, but we can't know. But it is possible that this is the first time that the Chinese thumb release comes into contact with horse peoples. So it is possible, but we don't know. Now, if we come forward a little bit, the Saka people, and now that they've mixed with the ethnic Chinese, and they sort of, it's sort of felt that they were either evolved into, or their culture became absorbed by the Scythians. Now, where the Saka were ethnically northwestern Chinese, the Scythians seem to have been primarily ethnic Central European, Central Eurasian. So it is possible that the Saka, being an ethnic Eurasian group, may have been absorbed by or evolved into the Scythians, because they have a similar sort of ethnic makeup, a mixture of Northern European and Chinese, much like the Mongols of modern day are. But their horse tradition is quite sophisticated. Now, whether it's an evolution of the Saka horse tradition, or whether it's something completely new, we don't know. There just isn't the evidence there. But if we look at the Scythian tradition, they use heavily recurved bows. Now, this is an important point. Heavily recurved bows, composite material made from ibex horn, birch wood, and horse sinew. Now, as far as adopting a thumb release is concerned, the Scythians are neighboured on the east by the Chinese and to the west by the Slavic nations. Now, we know the Slavs used their own type of release, which is sort of like a split finger with an extended finger over the top. Now, did the Slavs have something similar? Did the Scythians have something similar to the Slavs and adopt their sort of style? Because the bows are similar sort of sizes, heavily recurved. They're not recurved with a sear or a lever to increase the recurve like many of the later horse bows are, which, by the way, I believe actually come later. So we have a situation where the Scythians have their own archery tradition, but we don't know what kind of... Did they use a thumb release? Did they use a Slavic style release? Did they use a split finger, 3 finger? We just don't know. But their bows were long enough that they could, and of a style, the recurve style, that they could have used any of the string releases that we know of. They could have used a pinch release, could have used a thumb release, they could have used a split finger, could have used 3 fingers under, 2 fingers under, could have used anything, any of those grips they could use with their bows. Their bows were long enough and sophisticated enough to allow free positioning of the hand on the string without the fingers being pinched. And they've only actually found 2 or 3 examples of Scythian bows in Scythian funeral sites. So we don't even have the bows that we could examine for specific wear patterns. For instance, if you're shooting with the thumb, you're going to be shooting outside the bow and you're going to have a specific wear pattern that matches that. And if you're shooting inside the bow, you're going to have a specific wear pattern on the bow that matches that. And we can't know, because the bows that have been found have been in the ground for that long, that deterioration has happened. And as far as I can tell, nobody has been able to ascertain whether there's any wear pattern on those bows at all. But we do know they still traded with the Chinese, because they've found Chinese-made artifacts within the graves. Now, the Scythians were animalistic. They based their religion, their beliefs, around the various animals. Again, semi-nomadic like the Saka, moved around and hunted and followed herds and things like that. But without the evidence, we can't say one way or another whether they used a thumb release or not. It's possible. You could even probably say probable, but we just don't know. Now, I'm going to say that I don't believe they did. I believe they used a vertical hand style of archery, mainly because the trading that the Scythians did mainly went south into the Mediterranean and the Arabic Peninsula. They didn't go east towards China as much. And again, I come back to this point that if you have an archery tradition, a technique, it would have to be substantially less effective than a new one you come into contact with for you to adopt it. And if there's no need for you to adopt it, you are going to continue with your traditional method. That's why the Mediterranean release has lasted so long. That's why there are peoples out there who are using the pinch grip and still using the pinch grip, even though there are more effective ways of drawing the bow, even today. But they still persist with their traditional style, and that's why the thumb release is still around, because it fits with the bows it's used with. If it didn't, it wouldn't still exist. So the Scythians, they are trading east and west, and they're also trading north and south. Now, they traditionally come from the northern region, so they're trading with themselves and with the Rus, people like that. And they're coming down into the northern Mediterranean, well, the end of the Mediterranean, and trading with the Greeks and with the Macedonians, such as that. They're trading with they're trading with the Egyptians. They're trading with the peoples from North Africa, from the Nile Delta and the Nile Valley up as far as the first cataract, which is where the Nubians come from, which we'll talk about in a moment. But at the same time as they're trading down into Egypt, we have a situation where the Assyrians and the Persians and those peoples on the Arabic Peninsula are trading up into the Mediterranean and meeting up with the Slavs and people like that. Now, as far as the thumb release is concerned, at around this time, we can date the Scythians from around about 1900 BCE for definite as into the 5th and 4th centuries BCE, which means they were even coming into contact with the Roman Republic, with the early Roman nascent empire. And yet we still don't see in this region any true evidence of the thumb release. Now, there's a couple of traditions, archery traditions, we can look at to see if we can find evidence dating from the end of the Scythian era, the 5th, 4th, possibly the 3rd century BCE. Now, we can look at the Romans. We know the Romans didn't actually use horse archery almost at all. They used horses, obviously they did, but most of their use of horse and archer combinations were for scouts, fast-moving troops for scouting and for messaging, but they didn't use them as combat troops. And as far as the archery is concerned, there's no real evidence to suggest what kind of draw techniques they were using. The bows were recurves, very similar to the Scythian bows, and as far as we know, they used a Slavic or a split finger vertical hand string grip. The Greeks, contemporary at the same time. Now we know for a fact what kind of archery the Greeks were doing because they recorded their military and social history on their ceramics. And there are lots and lots and lots of examples from the first millennia, like the 500s, the 600s BCE, all the way through until the 1st, 2nd and 3rd centuries AD. Thessalonian black ceramics. Everybody's seen them, almost, I guarantee you virtually everybody who's watching these videos has at some point seen some Greek ceramics of this style. Black with the gold decoration on it. Usually geometric across the top and across the bottom, with scenes of activities, military, social activities around the centre band. Now on some of the bigger pieces, the detail shown and depicted is very crisp and very precise and very clear. And from that detail we can pick out forms of sword, forms of knives used, footwear, clothing, just about everything the Greeks used. If it's depicted on, it's been depicted on their ceramics, and we know what they did. And from every example of archery on these ceramics, they're using a pinch grip. They're not using a thumb release. They're not using a vertical split finger. They're using pinch grip. Whether that changed later on when we get into the Holy Roman Empire phase, the Byzantine Empire phase, but the time we're looking at in the first millennia BCE, we're also using recurve bows similar to the Scythians. Now, whether the recurve bows and that the Greeks were using and the Romans were coming from the north from the Scythians, or whether they were coming from the south from the Assyrians, we don't know. But the bows are there as evidenced by the depictions. Now, the next one we're going to look at is the Egyptians. Now, the Egyptians have a very old archery tradition, as depicted in their tombs and on their temple walls and places like that. And those depictions date back to 8,000 BC. It's a long, and it's late, anyway, it's a very long tradition. 8,000 years of archery denoted and depicted on the walls of these buildings. Now, if you look, the archery depicted is almost exclusively, until we get to about 1200 BCE, it's almost exclusively of a long bow type, as in the bows are as long, if not longer, than the archer is tall. And they appear to be self-wood bows made from the palm tree. And now we know this because they've found archaeological evidence to suggest. The problem with the palm wood tree bows is when you cut a stave of palm wood, it can take up to 4 years for it to dry sufficiently to the point where it can be used to make a bow. So very material intensive proposition to make a bow. Now, as we come forward in time from 8000 BCE, where they are depicting the longbows, they're also depicting Nubian archers. Again, the Nubian longbowmen. They are using a longbow, but it's getting a bit more sophisticated. It's self-wood, but with deflex tips. Now the Nubians come from the Nile Valley as it travels into Africa proper, but they come from the First Cataract, what's known as the First Cataract region, and they are used extensively for a very long time as mercenaries, as auxiliary troops, for their precisely because for their archery skills. Now again, if you look, but they all show him using an arm bracer. Now, if you are shooting thumb release, you do not need an arm bracer, because the only reason for having an arm bracer on your bow arm is because you're getting string slap. And the only techniques you get string slap with is if you're shooting off the inside of the bow, shooting off the back of the hand rather than the thumb. You're shooting off the left-hand side of the bow, and you're using a finger-based string grip, whether it's 3 fingers under, split finger, whatever. Even like a Slavic string release will actually put us a clockwise string twist, which pulls the arrow into the bow. But because of the positioning with the vertical hand, it brings it closer to the face and more in line with the arm, and you're more likely to get string slap. So finger draw archers shooting off the inside of the bow, for the most part, wear arm braces, because you can get quite nasty string slap. So there's evidence for the Egyptians not using thumb release. Now their archery tradition is actually quite sophisticated as well, especially by the time we get to the time of King Tutankhamun. And then as we come down even more in the timeline towards the 1st century BC AD, we see the development of composite bows becoming more and more sophisticated, but still no evidence for a thumb release or anything like that, and still no evidence of horse archery. Even when we get to the 1st century AD and the time of Cleopatra and Mark Antony and the amalgamation of the Egyptians with the Romans, they're still basically using chariots. There's still no evidence for horse archery. The nobles hunted from chariots. Now, in terms of archery, most of the military archery was done by the Nubians, and they all worked on foot. So, we've covered the Saka and the Scythians. We've followed the Scythians down into Macedonia and Greece and Egypt. We've covered their interactions with the nascent Roman Empire. So we're getting there now, but we still have no real evidence at all for the adoption of the thumb release. So, apart from the Chinese, and even though we've come forward 1,000 years, 1,200 years to Central Europe, we still have no evidence for the use of thumb release in conjunction with mounted archery. So what we're going to do, I'm going to leave it there. In the next video, we're going to start off with the Egyptians again, and then we're going to move south into the Arabian Peninsula, and then into Asia Minor, then into the Indian subcontinent, and we'll look at their archery tradition, starting and then working our way back up to the Indus Valley civilizations, and then Indochina, and then back into China itself. It's quite an interesting little journey we've got coming up. So I'm going to leave it there. Plenty to think about, plenty to talk about, If you've got opinions, please do leave a comment, and we'll have a conversation. Other than that, stay safe, keep slinging the sticks, and we'll talk again very soon. Cheers, guys.